Marcus Hale woke to a blue screen, floating about 1.5 feet from his face. For several seconds, he did nothing. He stared at it through half-open eyes, trapped in that miserable space between sleep and waking, where the mind could still believe almost anything if it was tired enough. The room around him was dim, gray with early morning light, the familiar shapes of his dresser, and desk barely visible beyond the glow. The screen hovered in the air. Translucent. Silent. Impossible. Marcus blinked. The screen remained. Blue light washed over his blanket, his pillow, and the back of his hand where it rested near his face. Thin lines moved across the floating panel like something loading, though there was no phone, no monitor, no projector, and no source he could understand. Words formed in the center. Compatible Haven candidate detected. Marcus frowned. His eyes closed halfway. Nope, he muttered. The screen did not care. Another line appeared beneath the first. Awaiting compatible Haven. Marcus stared at it. His brain tried to assemble those words into something useful and failed. Haven candidate. Compatible Haven. It sounded like a video game notification written by someone who hated people. A third line flickered into place. Initialization pending. Marcus lay there in silence. The ceiling fan turned slowly above him. His laundry chair sat in the corner beneath a hoodie he had meant to hang up 3 days ago. His phone rested on the nightstand, black screen dark, charger cable bent at an angle that would probably kill it within a week. Everything in the room was normal, except the glowing blue screen floating in front of him. That made the whole room feel insane. Marcus lifted one hand and waved it through the air where the screen hovered. His fingers passed through cold light. The screen vanished. No sound. No flash. No dramatic burst of pixels. 1 second it was there. The next it was gone. Marcus stared at the empty air above his bed. Great. He waited. Nothing happened. No second screen appeared. No voice spoke from the ceiling. No hidden camera dropped out of the vent. The room settled back into early morning quiet as if reality had simply coughed, corrected itself, and expected him to move on. Marcus rubbed both hands over his face. He had stayed up too late. That was the easiest answer. Too much coffee, too little sleep, too much staring at assignment files and job listings until his eyes burned. His final year of engineering school had done things to his sleep schedule that probably counted as a medical condition. He reached for his phone. The screen lit up. 6:12 in the morning. Marcus stared at the time, then dropped his phone back onto the nightstand. He was awake now. That was annoying. For a minute, he stayed where he was, listening to the house. The Hale house had its own morning language, pipes ticking faintly in the walls, the low hum of the refrigerator downstairs. A soft thump somewhere below that probably meant his father had set a mug down on the kitchen counter with more force than necessary. Normal sounds. Real sounds. Marcus breathed out and sat up. The first thing he noticed was the cold. It pressed against his bare arms, sharp enough to raise goosebumps. His bedroom window was cracked open a few inches, the way he had left it the night before because late August had been humid and heavy and miserable. The room should have been cool, maybe a little uncomfortable. It felt colder than that. Marcus swung his legs over the side of the bed and stood. The floorboards were cold under his feet. Seriously. He crossed the room and grabbed the lower edge of the window. The old frame stuck for half a second before sliding down with a dull wooden thud. He locked it, then rested his hand against the glass. Cold. Not winter cold. Not even close. But colder than an August morning had any right to be. Marcus pulled the curtain aside and looked out. The neighborhood looked beautiful. That was the first thing that struck him. The sun had only just started to break over the horizon, painting the roofs and trees in a thin band of pale gold. The street was quiet. Cars sat in driveways. Lawns sloped toward the sidewalks in neat green squares. A few porch lights still glowed, small warm dots against the blue-gray morning. For a moment, nothing seemed unusual. Then Marcus noticed the faint silver along the edge of the grass. He leaned closer. Frost. A delicate, glittering line of it clung to the lawn across the street, bright where the sunrise touched it. It was thin enough to almost be dew, but the pattern was sharper than dew, crystalline and pale. Marcus frowned. Late August, he said under his breath. The glass fogged faintly where his breath touched it. He let the curtain fall back into place. Maybe a cold front had come through. Weather did weird things. People complained about it, meteorologists explained it badly, and then the day moved on. That was how weather worked. Marcus got dressed. He pulled on jeans, a dark shirt, and a hoodie from the chair. The hoodie smelled clean enough, which made it clean by the standards of a student who had spent the last week living between projects, laundry, and half-finished cups of coffee. His room looked ordinary in the morning light. Desk crowded with notebooks. Laptop half open. A stack of engineering textbooks on the floor beside the chair, because his shelf had surrendered months ago. No blue screen. No floating words. No evidence that anything impossible had happened. Marcus stood in the center of the room for one more second, looking at the empty space over his bed. Then he shook his head and headed downstairs. The smell of breakfast met him halfway down. Eggs. Toast. Coffee. Something warm and buttery in a pan. His stomach reacted before his mood could catch up. The kitchen was already alive. His mother stood at the stove, turning the last pieces of toast in a skillet with practiced little movements. Her hair was pulled back, and she wore the old blue sweater she always claimed was ugly but never threw away. A dish towel hung over one shoulder. His father sat at the kitchen table with a coffee mug in one hand and the television remote in the other. David Hale looked like he had been awake for hours, though Marcus knew that was mostly because his father had never learned how to look unprepared. Even in jeans and a faded work shirt, he carried himself like a man mentally organizing the day before anyone else had found the floor. Margaret laughed at something David said. Marcus caught only the end of it. And then he tells me the ladder was like that when he found it, Margaret said. David lifted his mug. It was an honest lie. It was a terrible lie. It worked long enough for my brother to get blamed first. Margaret turned from the stove with a look of mock disappointment. That is not the same thing as working. It bought me 12 minutes. 12 minutes of cowardice. 12 minutes of strategy. Marcus stepped into the kitchen, mourning. Both of them looked over. Margaret's expression warmed at once. There he is. David glanced at the clock on the microwave. Look at that, awake before 7. Should we call someone? Marcus opened the cabinet and reached for a mug. You laugh now, but this is what peak discipline looks like. Peak discipline looks tired, David said. Peak discipline was up late doing actual work. Actual work, Margaret said, sliding toast onto a plate, is easier to respect when it does not involve forgetting to eat dinner. Marcus paused with the coffee pot halfway to his mug. David pointed at him with the remote. Caught. I ate. Margaret turned. Marcus corrected himself. I had food. What food? A granola bar. David winced. That's not food, that's compressed regret. Marcus poured coffee and leaned against the counter. It had protein. Everything says it has protein now, Margaret said. That does not make it a meal. She set a plate on the table in front of the empty chair. Eggs. Toast. A small pile of potatoes. Marcus looked at it and decided not to argue with the only person currently feeding him. Yes, ma'am. Good answer. He sat. For a few minutes, the morning was exactly what it should have been. Forks against plates. Coffee steam rising in the light. His mother moving between stove and table, because she never fully sat until everyone else had food. His father watching the news with only half his attention, making small comments under his breath whenever an anchor said something that annoyed him. The kitchen window over the sink faced the backyard. Pale sunlight touched the curtains. The room was warm enough that Marcus almost forgot the cold upstairs. Almost. On the television, the local weather segment changed graphics. A smiling meteorologist stood in front of a blue map marked with temperature numbers that looked lower than Marcus expected. "Bit of a strange start this morning," the man said. "We're seeing unseasonably cold temperatures across the region, with some areas reporting patchy frost just after sunrise. That is unusual for late August, but we are expecting temperatures to climb as the morning continues." David lowered his coffee mug slightly. Marcus looked toward the window. Margaret set a small dish of butter on the table. "That explains your father complaining about the porch." "I did not complain. You stood there and said, 'That's frost,' like the yard had personally offended you." "It did offend me." Marcus picked up his fork. "There's frost across the street, too." Margaret's smile faded a little, but only a little. "Cold front." "Must be," David said. He did not sound fully convinced, but he let the answer stand. The meteorologist kept talking, moving through regional maps, record comparisons, and expected afternoon highs. It was strange, but still inside the boundaries of things that could be strange without mattering. Weather was allowed to be odd. Life was full of small oddities people noticed, discussed for 10 minutes, and forgot. Margaret finally sat with her own plate and looked at Marcus. "So, big week coming up." Marcus already knew that tone. He pointed his fork at her. "Don't start." "I have not started anything." "You have your school voice." "I have no such voice." David looked at Marcus. "She does." Margaret gave him a look. "You are not helping." "I know." Marcus smiled despite himself. His mother ignored David and turned back to him. "Are you excited?" "For what?" "For finishing. For being almost done. For stepping into the world as an educated adult with responsibilities and health insurance." Marcus snorted. "That last part is doing a lot of work." David nodded gravely. "Health insurance is romance for people with lower back pain." Margaret laughed into her coffee. Marcus looked down at his plate, pushing eggs around with his fork. "I'm excited, I think, mostly." "Mostly?" Margaret asked. He shrugged. "It's just weird. School is one thing, you know what the next assignment is, you know what gets graded, you know what happens if you mess up." David watched him over the rim of his mug. Marcus continued. "Jobs are different. I know I'm qualified, but everyone applying is qualified. I don't know. It feels like I'm standing in front of a door and everyone keeps telling me it opens, but nobody can tell me how hard I'm supposed to push." Margaret's expression softened. David set his mug down. "That professor's still helping you?" he asked. "Professor Whitaker," Marcus said. "Yeah, he said he has a few contacts and he'd put in a good word. He thinks I should aim higher than entry-level technician stuff." "He is right." Marcus looked at him. David did not say it loudly. He did not make it dramatic. That was not his way. His father simply sat there at the kitchen table, broad hands wrapped around a coffee mug, and spoke with the certainty of someone stating a measurement. "You're smart," David said. "You work hard, you show up, you listen. Half the world can't manage two of those at the same time." Marcus felt heat creep up the back of his neck. "Dad." "What?" "You make it sound simple." "It is simple." David tapped the table once with 2 fingers. "Not easy, simple." Margaret smiled at them. Marcus looked down again, but the embarrassment was warm. He had always admired his father more than anyone. David Hale had never gone to college. He did not have framed degrees or fancy titles or a vocabulary designed to make simple things sound expensive. What he had was discipline. He had a place for every tool, a list for every job, and a way of looking at problems that made panic feel wasteful. When something broke, David fixed it. When something needed doing, David did it. When Marcus was young, he had thought that was just what fathers were. Getting older had taught him otherwise. David was not perfect. He could be stubborn, blunt, and impossible when he thought he was right. But he was steady in a world that often felt like it rewarded noise more than competence. Marcus wanted to be like that. Not exactly, but close enough that it mattered. David's eyes returned to the television. His expression changed. Not much. Only enough that Marcus noticed. The local weather map had disappeared. A national anchor sat behind a desk now, one hand pressed to an earpiece. The banner beneath her read, "Developing Situation, Global Temperature Anomalies." Margaret followed David's gaze. "What is it?" David reached for the remote and raised the volume. The anchor's voice filled the kitchen. "Reports are still preliminary, but we are now receiving confirmation of sudden temperature drops in multiple regions across North America, Europe, and parts of Asia. Meteorological agencies are urging calm while they compare data from local monitoring stations." Marcus stopped eating. On screen, the broadcast shifted to a world map marked with blue patches. Too many blue patches. The anchor continued. "Several cities are reporting temperatures between 20 and 40 degrees below seasonal averages. Some areas have also reported localized frost formation despite conditions that would normally make that unlikely." Margaret looked toward the kitchen window. David leaned back slowly in his chair. "That many places at once?" Marcus asked. David did not answer immediately. The television cut to a remote interview with another meteorologist, this one from some national weather center. His hair was slightly messy, and his eyes kept flicking toward something off camera. "We are still verifying the numbers," the meteorologist said. "I want to emphasize that unusual temperature events do happen, but the scale and synchronization of these reports are highly irregular." "Highly irregular," David repeated under his breath. Margaret picked up her fork. "Eat." Neither Marcus nor David moved. Margaret pointed her fork at both of them. "I am serious. Whatever is happening, breakfast getting cold will not help." David looked at her. She held his gaze. After a second, he picked up his fork. Marcus did the same. The three of them ate, but the rhythm of the morning had changed. The forks sounded louder now. The coffee no longer smelled quite as comforting. The television kept talking. More reports came in. School delays in northern states. Traffic accidents blamed on sudden ice on bridges. Power fluctuations in several cities. International agencies issuing statements that said very little in the polished language of people trying not to cause panic. David watched all of it. Margaret pretended not to watch all of it. Marcus tried to focus on his food, but every few seconds his eyes lifted to the screen. Then the anchor went still. Her expression shifted into the carefully controlled seriousness that news anchors wore when something had gone beyond the script. "We are receiving new footage now," she said. "We want to warn viewers that what you are about to see has not yet been fully verified. Several videos circulating online appear to show unusual atmospheric events in multiple locations. We are going to show a short portion of one such video from outside Denver." The screen changed. The footage was vertical, shaky, and clearly filmed on a phone. At first, Marcus saw only a parking lot. Cars. A streetlight. A low building with a red sign he could not read. People stood scattered across the lot, all looking upward. The person holding the phone turned the camera toward the sky. Marcus forgot to breathe. The sky was torn. There was no other word for it. A long black split stretched through the clouds, jagged at the edges, as if someone had dragged a blade across the morning and cut through whatever held the world together. Pale blue light shimmered around the wound. Snow fell from it in thin, twisting streams, though the clouds around it did not look heavy enough for snow. The person filming whispered something Marcus could not make out. Someone else shouted in the distance. The tear pulsed. For half a second, the clouds around it bent inward. Then the footage cut. The anchor returned, paler than before. We are also receiving similar videos from locations in Canada, Germany, Japan, and Brazil. Again, these videos have not been independently verified, but local officials in several regions have confirmed unusual atmospheric phenomena. Marcus stared at the screen. His eggs sat forgotten on his plate. Margaret whispered, "What was that?" No one answered. There was no answer large enough to fit inside the kitchen. David stood. The chair legs scraped softly against the floor. Margaret looked up at him. "David." He walked to the front window and looked outside. Marcus turned in his chair to watch him. His father did not rush. He did not throw open cabinets or bark orders. He moved the way he always moved when a problem had become real enough to require both hands. Calm first. Think first. Then act. David checked the street through the curtains, then turned back toward them. "Phones," he said. Marcus reached for his. Margaret already had hers on the table. "Call who?" Marcus asked. David looked at the television. "Nobody yet, just make sure they work." Marcus unlocked his phone. Signal. Internet. Messages. Normal. He refreshed a news feed and immediately wished he had not. Videos were everywhere. Some showed frost spreading across roads. Some showed clouds spiraling around dark tiers in the sky. Some were already being called fake. Some looked too frightening to dismiss. Margaret held her phone in both hands. "My sister just texted. She says they saw something on the news, too." "Where is she?" David asked. "Still home." "Good." Marcus looked at his father. "Do we go somewhere?" David's jaw tightened. The question changed the room more than the footage had. Going somewhere meant admitting there might be somewhere safer than home. Staying meant admitting the danger might come to them. David looked toward the hallway, then the garage door, then the kitchen cabinets. "We do not run blind," he said. "Roads could be worse. Gas stations will be a mess if people panic. We have food here. Water, tools, blankets, first aid. The van has fuel." Margaret stood too. "You think it could get that bad?" "I think I do not know what it is." That answer frightened Marcus more than a guess would have. David Hale always had a working theory. Even if he was unsure, he had a direction, a next step, a practical shape to put around uncertainty. Now he had only caution. The television cut to another segment. The banner changed again. Breaking news. The anchor spoke faster now. "We are receiving scattered reports of violent incidents in several major cities. Officials in Chicago, Boston, Atlanta, and Seattle are confirming multiple attacks involving people assaulting pedestrians, drivers, and first responders without apparent warning. Police departments are asking residents to avoid crowded areas and remain indoors where possible." Margaret's hand tightened around the back of a chair. Marcus said, "People are just attacking people." "That is what she said," David answered. "Like riots." "Maybe." But David's face did not settle around the word. On the television, the anchor listened to her earpiece again. "Authorities have not confirmed whether these incidents are connected to the atmospheric events or temperature anomalies. Emergency services in several cities are reporting a high volume of calls, including reports of individuals behaving erratically, ignoring verbal commands, and attacking bystanders." Marcus stared at the screen. The idea of riots at least belonged to the world he understood. People panicked. People got angry. Crowds turned. Fear spread faster than sense. He could imagine that, even if it made him sick. But this did not sound like anger. It sounded like something else, using anger's shape. Margaret looked from the television to David. Could fear do that so quickly? David's mouth tightened. "Fear can do a lot," he said, "but not everywhere at once." The room went quiet again. Only the television kept moving. For a few seconds, the broadcast cut to clips from different cities. None of them lasted long enough to show much. A crowd running across a street, police lights flickering against glass, a woman crying into her phone while someone shouted behind her, a line of cars frozen in traffic beneath a sky that looked too dark for morning. Then the anchor came back. Her face was more controlled than calm. We are also receiving reports of attacks by unknown assailants in multiple locations. Details remain unclear, but witnesses describe the assailants as unusually pale, unresponsive, and extremely aggressive. We have not verified those descriptions. David's head tilted slightly. Marcus saw it. That small shift. His father had caught something. Unknown assailants, David said. Margaret looked between him and the screen. What? Earlier, they said people attacking people. Marcus turned toward him. David's voice lowered. Pedestrians, drivers, first responders, people behaving erratically. Now they are saying unknown assailants. Margaret frowned. Maybe they just do not know who they are. Maybe. But David did not sound like he believed it. The kitchen seemed colder. Marcus became aware of the window behind him, the closed glass, the pale morning beyond it, the quiet street outside the front of the house. His mind flickered, without warning, back to the blue screen. Compatible Haven candidate detected. Awaiting compatible Haven. Initialization pending. The words had made no sense then. They made no sense now. But they sat in his memory like ice under water, barely visible and impossible to stop noticing once he knew it was there. Marcus. He looked up. Margaret was watching him. You okay? He almost told her. For 1 second, he almost said that he had woken up to a screen floating over his face, that he had seen words that should not have been there, that something impossible had happened in his bedroom before impossible things started appearing on the news. But the words died before they reached his mouth. What would he say? I think I saw a magic screen before breakfast. I touched it and it disappeared. It said something about a haven. He swallowed. Yeah, he said, just thinking. David looked at him, a moment longer than usual. Then the television audio changed. The anchor's voice went quieter. We are about to show footage from a street-level incident in Chicago. We want to warn viewers, this footage may be disturbing. Margaret stepped closer to the table. David remained standing. Marcus did not move. The video appeared. It was another phone recording. Horizontal this time. Shaky, but clearer than the sky footage. A city street filled the screen. Cars sat at odd angles. A bus had stopped halfway through an intersection with its hazard lights blinking. People stood on the sidewalks, some filming, some backing away from something in the road. At first, Marcus could not tell what he was supposed to see. Then the camera zoomed in. A man in a suit walked down the middle of the street. He looked ordinary from a distance. Business jacket. White shirt. Dark tie hanging crooked. One shoe missing. His head drooped forward as he moved, chin nearly touching his chest. His steps dragged across the asphalt in uneven, sluggish pulls, as if each movement arrived late to the rest of his body. The person filming spoke. Hey buddy, are you okay? The man did not respond. He kept shuffling. A woman's voice nearby said, Don't go near him. The camera moved closer anyway. The man's hand twitched. Marcus leaned forward, without realizing it. Something about the man's posture pulled at the eye. The angle of his shoulders, the loose hang of his jaw, the stiffness in his neck. He looked like a person imitating a person and getting the details almost right. Sir, the cameraman called, do you need help? The man stopped. For one beat, the whole video seemed to hold still. Then his head snapped up. Margaret gasped. The man's face filled the screen. His skin had gone pale in a way that did not look bloodless so much as drained of warmth. His eyes were open too wide. His mouth stretched as if something inside him was forcing it wider than pain should allow. He looked directly at the camera. Then he shrieked. The sound tore through the kitchen speakers. It began like a human scream and twisted into something harsher, deeper, animal and breaking. The man lunged with terrifying speed, crossing the distance so suddenly that the cameraman barely had time to curse. The image jolted. A hand flashed across the lens. The camera spun. There was pavement. A tire. Someone screaming nearby. Then the footage cut back to the studio. The anchor was silent for half a second too long. Marcus heard his own breathing. Margaret had one hand over her mouth. David stood very still. The kitchen clock ticked above the doorway. The ordinary sound was unbearable. On the television, the anchor began speaking again, but Marcus barely understood the words. Confirmed, unverified, authorities, shelter indoors, avoid contact, emergency services overwhelmed, more information as it becomes available. The language of control draped over chaos. Marcus looked at his father. David's face had changed. Not with panic. Not with fear, exactly. With decision trying to form itself around too little information. Marcus knew that look. He had seen it when a storm knocked a tree across the driveway, when a pipe burst under the sink, when his mother's car died on the shoulder of the highway during a thunderstorm. Problem. Inventory. Options. Risk. Action. But this was not a fallen tree. This was not plumbing. This was a man in a suit becoming something else on national television, while the sky tore open above cities Marcus had never visited. Margaret lowered her hand. "David," she said softly. He looked at her. The room held them that way for a moment. Husband. Wife. Son. A family at a breakfast table, surrounded by eggs and toast and coffee, watching the edges of the world come apart. "We stay inside," David said. His voice was calm enough to stand on. "Nobody opens the door. Nobody goes outside. We check the locks. We fill containers with water in case the power goes. We keep the phones charged. We stay away from the windows unless we are looking for a reason." Marcus nodded. Margaret nodded too. But her eyes were shining. David saw it. His voice gentled. "Maggie." "I know," she said. "I'm not saying it is all falling apart. I know. I'm saying we treat it like it could." She breathed in. Then she nodded again, firmer this time. Marcus pushed back from the table. "What do you want me to do?" David looked at him. There it was again. Pride even now. Not soft. Not spoken. Present. "Start upstairs," David said. "Close every window. Check the latches. Then your phone, laptop, anything with a battery, plug it in. After that, come back down and we'll make a list." "A list?" "Of course." Marcus almost smiled. Not because anything was funny. Because for half a second, his father sounded like himself so completely that the world outside the kitchen had to be exaggerating. Then the television showed the sky tear again. The smile never made it. Marcus stood. The kitchen felt dimmer than it had 10 minutes earlier. He turned toward the stairs, then stopped. Something had caught his eye. The window over the sink. Earlier, it had been clear. The backyard beyond it still looked peaceful. The fence, the grass, the old maple tree, the weak gold of morning sunlight touching everything like any other day. But along the bottom edge of the glass, frost had appeared. Thin white lines crawled upward from the frame. Marcus stared at them. They spread slowly, branching into delicate veins across the pane. Beautiful little patterns, fragile and intricate, the kind of thing he might have admired on a January morning with nowhere to be and a mug of coffee in his hand. It was August. No one spoke. The television murmured behind them. Outside, the neighborhood remained still. No screams. No sirens. No crashing cars. No footsteps running down the street. Only silence. Marcus watched the frost climb the kitchen window and understood, without understanding anything at all, that the morning had already changed. The world had not ended with fire. It had begun ending quietly. In the cold,